Please join me in welcoming the woman that RNC has tasked with helping defeat the so-called war on women, Kellyanne Conway.
Thank you so much, Angel. That was so lovely. And I thank my mom for writing the introduction. Yuri, thank you. What a bunch of superstars. How cool are these young people? And Morton, I will always be a conservative, but I'm no longer a young conservative. It really hurts to be a pollster. Every time you celebrate a birthday, you realize you're in a whole other demographic group. But I have known Morton for at least half my life, maybe longer, and I've admired him just as long. As you look at that gallery of faces out on the wall, as you look in this room, as you look literally across the country, on our campuses, in our legislative halls in different states, and certainly in our own U.S. Congress and Senate, you see so many men and women who have passed through the Leadership Institute formally, and those who have not passed through the Leadership Institute formally have certainly benefited enormously from all the Leadership Institute and Morton Blackwell have offered over the years. No single person in this country has done more to train and equip with the tools to really animate and engage young leaders than Morton Blackwell and the Leadership Institute, and I think we're all in his debt. Thank you, Morton. We're probably in his debt for the results that were the fabulous 2014 elections also. Shall we review? I never tire of this topic. What did we learn, and what does it mean for the future? The future starts right now, of course. The Congress is meeting today, and of course, we'll have things going on in the lame duck session, and then the new Congress will be seated with 57 new Republican members. I'd say mostly conservative. It's not just a Republican Congress now. It is a conservative. It is a center-right Congress, and we are a center-right nation, try as they may to say otherwise. But I'd like to talk about a few things maybe that haven't been discussed with respect to the 2014 elections, what it means for the new legislative agenda and across our nation in our state legislatures, and also what it means for 2016 and what we can do to help shape that. The 2014 elections were an unequivocal repudiation of President Obama's policies, Harry Reid's dysfunctional Senate, and a Democratic Party that continues to drift leftward amidst a nation that is resisting that drifting. Actually, I think it's a pretty speedy rather than a driftward. But they really want to take the country away from its ideological moorings. And the country, the voters this time, wised up and said that's too much. And voters do have a way of slapping back either party when they feel like they're overreaching. Actually, conservatives have a way of staying home and not voting when they feel that the Republican Party is not doing enough to go ahead and bolster a conservative agenda. But voters, by and large, are very good about pushing back at a party, in this case the Democrats, who are trying to veer outside of the 240-yard lines, if you will. The proof for the premise begins with the president himself, who famously said on October 4th, "Make no mistakes, my policies are on the ballot." And that comment alone, really, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, President Obama, and we are in his debt too. Thank you, President Obama, for making very clear what so many of us were trying to convey, and saving gazillions of dollars in the process of last-minute ads, of making it very clear that, yes, your policies were on the ballot. And the fact is, voters heard him, they agreed, and they issued a big course correction. The election was not simply a referendum on an unpopular president and his policies. It is a mandate for governing, and that's what's important. It is a mandate for governing. It is not about gathering and husbanding power for power's sake. It is a mandate for conservative governance, and I certainly hope that our men and women in office will heed that call often, early and often. Voters told pollsters that they feared no good solutions on jobs and the economy, remain confused and concerned about Obamacare, and fear the federal government is too expansive, too expensive, too intrusive, and too invasive. If I had to pick two big themes from the 2014 elections, they would be security and fairness. So you may say, oh, but Kellyanne, jobs and the economy, I get that. I'm a pollster, I get that. That's almost baked in the cake. Jobs and the economy, number one issue. Obamacare, certainly national security, border security. piped up to the top of the list starting in about July and certainly in September. A couple of beheadings of innocent Western citizens on your laptop will really galvanize and crystallize and bring into sharp relief public opinion on what they believe is a lack of leadership and responsiveness here in Washington, in the White House. But what I mean by the themes of security and fairness are number one on security. So certainly job security, economic security, this chronic feeling of vulnerability among young people. When we do polling of millennials, they admit to, I think the most fascinating data insight there is that so many millennials say that they literally can't get on with the natural accoutrements of a grown-up life because of the chronically poor economy. So we ask them, which of the following have you delayed or deferred or maybe won't do altogether because of the state of the economy? We don't say because of the poor Obama economy or the negative economy. If you think the economy is going well, you answer the question through that perspective. But it is amazing to me that the top answer to millennials is they say they can't get out of student debt. That's the first one. Not so amazing, but they can't get out of student debt. Number two, they can't continue their educations, which is a really bad extension of the first one. Number three, they can't get out of regular debt, so non-student debt. Number 4 and 5, and this is where I want conservatives to wake up across the board. Number 4 and 5, get married, have a family. They logically say, when people say, oh, they're selfish there. Listen, they're practically thinking, too, I can hardly support myself. There aren't the job prospects there that there were when their grandfathers were 22 and 23. And there's not that overall economic security. This idea that you're going to get $1 more in a minimum wage and be there for the rest of your grown-up years is not a very attractive premise. And so I believe that social conservatives should look into these economic numbers as well and say, what are we doing to the next generation of would-be hardworking, would-be center-right thinking and doing, next generation of moms and dads, certainly of married individuals, and certainly of our workforce? What are we doing by keeping them down? And it showed up in the polls. 66% of young people voted for President Obama in 2008. But that went down to 60% in 2012. Most reelected incumbents improved their numbers among their core. And actually, President Obama's went down. His take among women went down 3%. His take among millennials went down 6%. His take among white working class voters plummeted. And the reason is they looked at his agenda. Now, 66% in 2008 among millennials, 60% in 2012, 56% of millennials voted Democratic in 2014. So they're waking up and they're responding to what they see, not what they're told. America's lacks confidence in the status quo, and that's a different way of talking about security. When I'm saying security, it's also what's happened with Obamacare. The lack of security that you have about keeping your plan, keeping your doctor, but also keeping your job because of all the employer compliance with respect to Obamacare. That's just an incredible letdown and conundrum for many Americans who feel that Obamacare is the best example we have of how intrusive and expensive the federal government has become. It's also about national security. So in 2014, Security Mom returned, if in fact she'd ever receded. And national security really jumped to the top of probably the number 4 issue overall, which is incredible given the fact that most Americans have been silent on it for almost a decade. You had a big surge in national security concerns and concerns about terrorism, and then the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan during the Bush years, but it really had receded in recent years. It's back up there. And it started not in September. It started in July. It started with the Children at the Border crisis, when Americans looked at their TVs and said, are you kidding me? And they looked at it in so many different ways, part compassion, but part common sense. How are we going to absorb this logistically? And when they say, who is it fair to? The only thing the mainstream media ever asks in terms of fairness when it comes to illegal immigration is, what is fair to the illegal immigrant? They never, ever run stories about what is fair to American workers and the legal immigrants here who are competing for the same jobs. What is fair to our local communities, to our school systems, to our resources? What is fair to those who are already here and who are competing for the same spots in a school or the same job in the line? And And I think Tom Cotton in Arkansas and even Scott Brown, who was ultimately unsuccessful in New Hampshire, those were the two individuals running for Senate who really took this issue of immigration through the lens of the American worker and made their races really count on that issue, because they're at 80%, according to our polls, say that a newly created job should go to American workers and legal immigrants first. They're not protectionist. They're saying, look, I've been told that the men in my life who are construction and manufacturing, for whom these jobs are not coming back, the skilled workforce, the non-college educated workforce, they've been told, well, you're competing with your job for your job with people in China. And they realize, no, I'm also competing with 12 people who are on the street corner willing to work $5 an hour under the table. And they are responding in kind. And so that whole security, that feeling of a lack of control and a lack of certainty, coupled with a lack of fairness in what I just said in our immigration system, fairness in who gets the seats in college and who gets the jobs that are available, fairness in terms of our education system. Is it fair? I tell candidates all the time, just begin with, is it fair? Is it fair that where you go to school as a youngster is determined by your zip code and not by your intelligence or by your drive or by your ambition? Is it fair that 47% of the country doesn't pay taxes? Is it fair that we cynically say that illegal immigrants are here to do the jobs Americans don't want to do, when many of those Americans are saying, excuse me, billionaire X, I would do that job if it were available to me on a fair playing field? And so the question of fairness, really goes on. And this is a place where I think conservatives who are now in positions of leadership should go on offense, particularly on education. It is a complete conundrum to me how Republicans are always on defense in education. So, I'm coming to Congress now, I'm going to put a sock in my mouth about education because I don't believe the federal government has a role in education. Terrific. Begin with that. The federal government doesn't have a role in education. And then talk about the strength of charters and school choice. In New York, where I've done work for the charter schools since they've opened their doors about 10 years ago, 92% of the charter school students in New York City are black or Hispanic. And the new mayor, who ran on improving race relations and bridging the two New Yorks and having one New York, he now has created 10 New Yorks, and all the squeegee men are back to boot. Bill de Blasio, has evicted the charter school students, 92% of whom are black or Hispanic, because it's a sop to the teachers' unions and because not everybody can get into the charter schools. But that's free market education. The supply cannot meet the demand. And we're for school choice options, and we're against the Common Core, an incredibly important issue going into 2016. So all of this is about security, the sense that you live a good life, you pay your dues, and yet things are not fair. And it's also a sense of fairness in terms of how our system should work. By the way, people may not look to the federal government to provide fairness or provide security, but they darn well don't expect them to rob them of their fairness and their opportunities and their security. That's the difference. What else happened in 2014? Well, Democrats like to spin those results as a rejection of incumbents. It was an anti-incumbent. No, it wasn't an anti-incumbent election. 94.7% of those got reelected. It was an anti-democratic. It was an anti-liberal election. It was a pushback. Frankly, people fired the blue team and hired the red team. And look at what happened in the legislatures. Republicans took over 11 more legislative chambers. That is not a little error. That is not an accounting error. That was an affirmative vote for the kind of leadership that people want closer to home. And I'm always astonished and heartened. We were doing focus groups last night online, actually, the last 2 nights, and even there I saw it. People are very focused on local government, on what happens in the states. They have figured out, well, hold on, this is what impacts my personal liberties and my pocketbook issues on a day-by-day basis. And most people in this country live in a state where the Electoral College, the fix is in already presidentially, so they feel like they can really make an impact closer to home. And they're paying rapt attention to those issues. Republicans gained majority control of the U.S. Senate, as you know, have the greatest number of House seats since 1949, 31 governorships, including some in true blue territory like Maryland and Massachusetts, and a modern-day record of state legislative seats. Democrats now control the lowest number of state legislatures since 1860. I didn't say 1960, since 1860. That's remarkable. That is not simply a trend or a fad. That is a complete repudiation of what has become a very extreme political party. And let me address that. If anyone in this room ever feels like they have to hunker down to escape the shrapnel of people accusing us of being the extreme movement, of being the polarizing movement, take a look. Don't take a look in the mirror. Take a look at the other side. Can you name for me 5 pro-life Democratic women in this country? Exactly. 4? Cue the Jeopardy clock. 3, 2, 1. You going to say Kirsten Powers? No, Democratic. No. We have plenty of pro-life women. We have plenty pro-life Democratic women. That's okay. In office, it's a stumper. They've been completely driven from the party. They don't exist. Where are the boll weevil Democrats? Where are the blue dog Democrats? There's one senator left. There's one United States senator left as a Southern Democrat, and I predict this Saturday her time will be up. Mary Landrieu in Louisiana, in Morton's, Louisiana. They have completely purged a certain element, a large constituency of their party. And we're afraid of them? I'm not afraid of them at all. I just sent a whole shipment of vitamins to Debbie Wasserman Schultz because I want her to keep that job as long as she'll be there. I don't even understand who they ascend in their party, elevate in their party. Nancy Pelosi, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Ladies, anger is not an agenda. Let me put it as politely as I can. If people turn on the TV and they see a scowl and anger, they will not pump up the volume. They will change the channel or hit mute, or both of the above. And they elevate people who represent districts that are so outside of the mainstream of the rest of the way America thinks, and think that that is the way that America thinks. And at this party, I think it's very important looking at 2016 because I think it's making it incredibly difficult for any Democrat to run as Bill Clinton did in 1992, as a centrist Democrat, as a moderate Democrat. And then he didn't rule as one in the first 2 years, and then became, again, a centrist Democrat, a moderate Democrat. But the other things that, the other big thing that happened in 2014 that I'm just thrilled about is the war on women died. And it was a slow, painful, important death. This cynical one-note narrowcasting to women based on abortion and contraception failed. It worked in 2012 because we had some Republican candidates running for Senate who said some unfortunate things. But it also worked because you can nationalize an election with somebody like President Obama on matters like that. And so it wasn't for a lack of trying in 2014. The left tripled down on the war on women. And you couldn't swing a dead cat and not hear somebody talking about women's health, women's health. But most women, when they think about women's health, don't think about abortion and contraception. If you ask America's women what concerns them about health, actually Obamacare is leap years ahead of abortion and contraception in case of what concerns them about women's health for a good reason. One's a real threat. And they'll talk about cancer. They'll talk about breast cancer. They'll talk about osteoporosis. They'll talk about long-term care, the hope that elderly women who outlive men by 6.8 years on average will have the care they need. They'll talk about type 2 diabetes. They'll talk about childhood asthma. They don't talk about contraception and abortion. And as I like to say, what does the average woman in this country do each week? Does she fill up the grocery cart and the gas tank, or does she get an abortion? What does she do every month? Does she pay off the tuition payment or the student loan voucher or the rent or the mortgage, or does she get an abortion? And I was really feeling my oats one day in this big amphitheater of women, where I'm the token conservative, and I said, "And what does a woman do every year? Does she?" And I saw some people shifting uncomfortably. I'm like, "Let me just stop at a month." So, in any event, but it's a serious point in terms of how women look at politics and policy, and they voted their interests. They voted common sense. They said that's really a conversation for the elite few. And then you had people like Mark Udall in Colorado being pushed back by liberal donors, and no other than the Denver Post, who nicknamed him Mark Uterus. Not my comment, theirs, saying, "We understand why you think it's important, but is there really nothing else to say to Colorado's women?" And Colorado's women responded in kind. They elected Cory Gardner as their next United States Senator. And the war on women, the reason that it was so important to defeat it in 2014 is you literally couldn't talk about anything else until you got around it, until you shoved it out of the way. And we have counseled clients. I frankly think our friend Ken Cuccinelli could have been a huge national hero in 2013 had he been the first to do this. Virginia was a wonderful, wonderful example. It's a huge missed opportunity because you're running against Terry McAuliffe. And you have the whole nation's political attention all to yourself. And so you could have been a national hero and really set the stage for 2014 by saying, war on women, I'm against women. Well, have you explained to your 3 daughters, Terry McAuliffe, whether you're for or against sex selection abortion? 84% of the country is against having an abortion for the sole reason that you don't want a child of that sex, which is usually a girl. So you can get a sex test now, go into a health clinic, go to your doctor, get a sex test, and then schedule your abortion. That makes people wince. And I say, ladies and gentlemen, time to make them wince. Time to turn on its head which party and which movement is truly extreme on the matter of abortion. Is the one that says a woman facing an unplanned pregnancy deserves our judgment, our compassion and our support, not our judgment and condemnation? Or is it the movement that says abortion anyone, anytime, anywhere? Absolutely no restrictions, regulations of any kind in their party's platform. Go read it. So every Democratic candidate should be asked what Terry McAuliffe was not asked. Okay, so you say that you're for choice. You're running as a Democrat. I'm just curious. Are there any parts of the Democratic Party platform with which you disagree? Do you think it's okay, abortion anytime, anywhere? Can you come up with any situation where you think it's just not a good idea? Let's say 8th or 9th month. Let's say after a heartbeat is detected. How about after nonpartisan scientists and doctors say a fetus can feel pain? Roughly 20 weeks, the halfway point, almost 5 months of pregnancy. Then they really start to wince. But ask them in succession. What about taxpayer funding abortion? Do you think taxpayers should fund your choice? What about, and you go down the list, and then, of course, sex selection abortion, and it makes people wince. And this year, more Democratic candidates were asked to account on that granular, that specific, rather than preening around. Planned Parenthood spent almost $100 million and still counting on get out the vote efforts. They were the ones knocking on the door in North Carolina, lying about Tom Tillis's record. It wasn't a Democratic National Committee. They were elsewhere. It was Planned Parenthood. And that's the other thing. Ask people, do you think it's fair? Again, fairness. Do you think it's fair? Do you just think it's right? Regardless of your position on abortion, ask your pro-choice friends, do you think it's right that Planned Parenthood got $542 million, $500 million in 2012 in taxpayer money, and it is the nation's largest abortion provider? And it spent $100 million this year just trying to defeat one party's candidates. Is it fair? Does it strike anybody as fair? And then you start to have a real conversation on these issues. So that's something where the table was set in 2014. What does this mean for Congress? Well, we all know over 300 bills that were passed in the Republican House in the last session went to die in Harry Reid's Senate. And Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi were more on the ballot than you may expect. I was always surprised when candidates, and all of ours won on Election Day. There aren't many years when I can say that, by the way, so that's good. But I was surprised how much of an issue. I was surprised what the name identification of Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi were in so many of these districts. But people were paying attention. They're saying, it's just incredible that you can't get anything. It's one thing to say you can't get anything done, but they can name you chapter and verse of the legislation that had passed in the House and never even so much as got a hearing or a vote in the Senate, and they don't like that. Put it on the president's desk. There are some days when I think the president was smart enough to cynically want a Republican Senate so that he'll get more power. At least he'll have his veto pen. But that thought passes quickly. I don't think he was smart enough to want a Republican Senate. I just think he didn't realize how unpopular he and his policies were. But let's start with immigration. 71% of actual voters said they believe the president should work with Congress, not around it, when it comes to transforming our nation's immigration laws. He went right around that, played the Lone Ranger, thinks that he should make policy on his own. The Republicans really have to stand up against executive amnesty, and people are watching and expecting that. Funding the government, funding runs out on December 11th. They're having a meeting right now about whether to have a short funding mechanism or to go through next September. and revisit national security concerns in March. I don't know that it's very productive at this moment, and you're not going to find people more conservative than me. I don't know if it's very productive at this moment to talk about government shutdowns and impeachment, because all that does is give the left one of the only two things they have left, really. That's what they're waiting for. They're lying in wait for that. At the same time, I think you're going to find a very principled yet very active Congress. Two other things struck me about 2014. One is this is really the year of the relatable Republican. After Mitt Romney lost to Barack Obama 81-10 on the question, the exit polling question, who cares more about people like you? 81 Obama, 10 Mitt Romney. That means a majority of Republicans agreed if it's 81-10. I mean, you have to see that. Who cares more about people like you? 2 short years later, we just elected in this nation Republicans who have the most incredible pull yourself up from your bootstraps biographies. Get to know these folks. It is just unbelievable. I was just talking to one last night, a friend of ours, Gary Palmer in Alabama. He was a client, but he's also a friend. He tells these great stories about growing up poor in Alabama. He's the new congressman where Spencer Barkus is. Barbara Comstock right here down the street, who put herself through law school with 2 young boys at home. The list goes on and on. Mia Love, whose parents came here from Haiti with $10 in their pocket, and she says never expected the government to take care of them once. Turned to God, turned to America, but didn't turn to the government. The biographies, it is the year of the relatable Republican at a time when the Democratic Party is headed up by multi-gazillionaires, and good for them. I'm a capitalist, good for them. But they're increasingly out of touch. What did we have this last time? Allison London Grimes running. Her father used to be in office. Michelle Nunn invoking George Herbert Walker Bush as her BFF and running around with her father. Mary Landrieu's father and brother in politics. You contrast that. You contrast the rich Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, John Kerry party to some of these new relatable folks, and it's incredibly important because voters ask themselves 2 questions about candidates. The first is, do I like you? That's a classic living room test. That's the one that Bill Clinton redefined. Do I like you? Do I want to see you for the next 4 or 8 years? That hurt Al Gore, his vice president. That certainly hurt Hillary Clinton, his wife. But it helped Barack Obama. It helped George W. Bush. Americans, with the exception of 1972, have always voted for the presidential candidate they saw as more optimistic and more accessible, more relatable, with the exception of 1972, where incumbent President Nixon just had other advantages. So we like people who are more uplifting, more optimistic. And I see a Democratic Party that looks like it's sucking on lemons. They're just angry all the time. They can't the reason I knew Republicans, we knew a lot of reasons why Republicans were going to do well. Oh, don't miss the 2016 talk. But one of the big reasons was that I noticed early on, whether it was somebody on that I was up against on TV or just watching people on the House floor, or Obama out on the stump, I noticed early on that Democrats were congenitally incapable in 2014 in answering a question about their agenda, their beliefs, their vision, their position, their call to action without saying the word Republican 10 times in a sentence. Go back and roll the tape. So what's your vision? What are we going to do about the kids at the border? Well, Republicans won't. I asked you about you. And they're incapable of answering that question. And they no longer have a boogeyman to go up against. It turns out that we have met the boogeyman, and it is them. And America rejected that. The other thing about 2014 is that I think it showed once again, like 2010, that Republicans do a really crappy job of running against Obama the person, but they do a really great job of running against Obama's agenda. And that, I submit to you, is exactly how they should run in 2016. I don't know why we devolve away from policies and into personalities, away from principles and into politics. Why we get away from questions about who's got the most free market economic plan and education plan into who can win, who can raise the most money, who can cross the finish line, who's likable. It's a terrible way of looking at it. You look at 2008, all the questions were, should we have the first black president, the first female president, the oldest president, John McCain, the first Mormon president? Who cares? Why this identity politics that even we allow to seep into the conversation? The questions should always be the same, and they should always be enduring. They should always be about policy, not personalities. I don't care if the person is purple and has 8 heads, as long as they are full spectrum conservatives. And voters don't ask, do I like you only? They ask, are you like me? That relatability is incredibly important. And Mitt Romney did not have that. But what was different in 2012 as opposed to 2010 and 2014? Well, in 2012, we couldn't run against Obamacare. How can you run against Obamacare when you nominate the guy who is the inspirational blueprint and the political cover for Obamacare? President Obama and Mitt Romney have government-run health care in common. Turns out they have Jonathan Gruber as a consultant in common. And, I was Newt Gingrich's pollster, and this was one thing that I'd go up on TV against Tim Pawlenty or Jim Talent, because, when you're the front runner, when you have all the king's horses, all the king's men supporting you, as Mitt Romney did, that's who you put out there as your surrogates. And they were never able to answer 3 questions, which are very important looking at 2016. One was, why should we nominate a guy who gave us Obamacare? Why should we nominate... And they would always say, but Romney can win. He's the only one who can win. Did he? Number 2, I'd ask them, why should we be happy that the first job in Washington, D.C., that Governor Romney or fill in the blank has ever had will be as President of the United States? I think that's a good question to ask, because you could say, well, Ronald Reagan never... That's not even fair to Ronald Reagan. He had years of dealing with a Democratic legislature in the nation's largest state. That's a really good experience. And stared down the unions, headed up the union. It had put referendum on the ballot in California on taxes, Prop 1, Prop 13. So it's not fair to him, and it's not analogous. But I think voters will ask that question, especially now when the world's on fire and the world's so dangerous. What is your experience in Washington, D.C.? You're just going to parachute into Washington, D.C. and figure out how to deal with the agencies and the Congress. So I think somebody who actually can run against Washington but has some kind of Washington experience is going to animate many grassroots conservatives. And number 3, stop already with the who can win. Please don't ask me that question. Voters don't ask themselves who can win. Voters ask themselves who can lead. And their definition of leadership is very different than the pundit, establishment, Republican, donor class question of electability. Who can win? The average person doesn't even know what that is. Who can win? Dole can win. McCain can win. Romney can win. And you know what they say? Oh, a moderate has to win. You have to run as a moderate. Well, okay, let me give you the aforementioned Dole, McCain, and Romney. Ladies and gentlemen, we've tried this formula, and it's a failing strategy. I gotta support Mitt Romney. I have to support Mitt Romney. Why? Well, he's the only one who can win. And I would politely say, okay, how do you know that he could win? Well, he's got all the donors supporting him. They all wrote him a check. They think he's high in the polls. I'm like, how did he get so high in the polls? Everybody thinks he can win. How's he raising all that money? Everybody thinks he can win. They wrote him a check. He did not lose for lack of money. They spent the same amount of money. He lost because conservatives were conscientious objectors. They poked the fruit. They looked and they said, not buying it. And if we do that again, we deserve to lose. You cannot nominate someone based on the mainstream media and a bunch of donors in New York City, which is la-la land, telling you who can win. The person who can win is the person who animates and engages the grassroots base of this party, who has something to say, who is unafraid. And so I say, number 1, when you hear the mainstream media, and then repeated by Republican consultants and pundits on TV and elsewhere, when you hear them tell you which Republicans can win, run the other way. I feel sorry for those Republicans because I put an X right across their names. As soon as I hear the mainstream media push the candidates, I say run the other way, because they know exactly who can lose. They knew David Axelrod and David Plouffe had spent over $3 million by 2011 planning to run against Mitt Romney. So my criterion for 2016 are very simple. Number 1, he or she has to be a full spectrum conservative. None of this, well, they're 75% right. If you're 75% right in high school or college, you got a D. No 75% right candidate, a full spectrum conservative. Morton and I were discussing before I got up here. He said, which is absolutely true, we have more people running who claim to be true blue, full spectrum conservatives than we've ever had before. And I said, well, if that many are claiming it, Morton, then there's bound to be one or two in the pot. So that's good. It's bound to be one. But let the cream rise to the top. Full spectrum conservative, that means great on defense, great on economy, great on social and moral issues, and also great on the kinds of issues that gave us the Tea Party, the kinds of issues that are just against government overreach generally, that'll talk about religious liberties, that'll put judges on the hot seat. Folks that'll talk about some of these issues that don't percolate up in the polls, but really go to constitutional conservatism. Number two, we have to nominate somebody who is completely, absolutely, unapologetically unafraid of Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and everything a Clinton candidacy would mean. If they even so much as say, or you know, I don't want them to run. Because, well, first of all, because she says, and you know, every sentence. But secondly, it shows softness to me. It shows they're worried about going up against the Clinton machine. They're worried about running against a woman. And is America ready for a woman president? Sure, why not? But it's not a question about, are you ready for a woman? It's a question of, are you ready for that woman? It is not a hypothetical. It is not a hypothetical. But you have to be unafraid of the Clintons. I just cut the Republican list of aspirants in half. Many of them are afraid of running against the Clintons. And they dodge this by saying, I'm just going to wait. I'm just going to go do my governor thing, go spend a little bit more time in the House and Senate. I have things I want to do. I'll run next time. They can't wait. If you're close to any of them and you want any of them to run, urge them to run in 2016. If any of them have a presidential race in them and they're your favorite full spectrum conservative, urge them to run. Because I believe that we will absolutely elect a conservative in 2016. He probably will be there for 2 terms. If they're any good about selecting a VP, maybe they'll be there for 12 years. So these people in their late 50s, early 60s to say, I'll just wait. They can't choose their timing. Have them run now so that we have a full debate, a full airing of conservative and constitutional principles this time. I'm not afraid of Hillary Clinton. I heard 8 years ago she had it wrapped up. Where's she now? I'm not afraid of her either because Hillary Clinton is the second most popular person in a 2-person household. Imagine waking up to that every day. I'm not popular again. I'm feminist alert. Hillary Clinton's husband was president, so she should be too. That is just an unbelievable conundrum to me. That a whole movement that runs against don't take your husband's last name and don't give in to the misogynist in-laws and don't let any man emasculate you. You wouldn't even know who this woman is if she weren't married to Bill. And I am not taking anything away from her intelligence and her accomplishments. But let's be serious before we give away the White House to Hillary Clinton. It is not her turn. It is not time to elect a woman. It is not. What are her qualifications? I'm not afraid of her also because of when I go back to relatability and accessibility. This is a woman who gives a discounted rate of $225,000 for a 20-minute speech. The market value, they say, is $300,000. But she gives a discounted rate of $225,000 to deliver a 20-minute speech. It takes the average woman who works in this country 5.5 years to make the money that she makes in 20 minutes. She's standing up for women in this country. She's going to advance women's rights. She's an icon for young women. She makes in 20 minutes saying absolutely nothing as far as I can tell. What it takes the average hardworking woman in this country 5.5 years to earn. Do not be afraid of this woman. Defeat her. Expose her. Thirdly, since I'm usually the only girl at the consultant's table, I'll be the one to say it. Enough with the art and emotion. Let's start doing a little bit more math and science, shall we? So yes, you have to be really able and accessible to run for president and to win the presidency. But you really can't win the presidency unless you win the Electoral College. My criterion, you should be able to prove that you can carry your home state in a general election and 2 contiguous states. That's my show me you can carry your home state in a general election, and I want 2 contiguous states. Why? Because this nonsense that you should nominate a blue state governor who maybe can't carry his or her own home state, but somehow is going to excite a critical mass of undecided voters in states where they don't live, is really nonsense. I'm not willing to take that chance. I want to walk into Election Day 2016 with electoral votes in our pockets. I want Ohio put away, or Iowa put away, or Pennsylvania put. I want these things in our pockets. Why are we spending a gazillion dollars in last-minute money? Because we're nominating people. I mean, Mitt Romney had 3 home states and he lost all of them: California, Michigan, and Massachusetts. All I'm saying is I'll go down to 1 home state. You have to carry your 1 home state. Most people only have 1 home state. You have to carry your home state and 2 contiguous states. I want to see that you've got regional strength. This is why the Rust Belt governors, frankly, are at the top of the list in many of the sort of the folks saying who should run for president. But I also think there's a strength for our guys who are here in Washington who want to run, our first-term senators who may want to run. And notice I haven't named a single name yet because I want you to focus on job descriptions, not on names. I discovered early on and shared this with both Senator Cruz and Senator Paul sometime in the spring and fall. I think it's spring for Senator Paul, fall for Senator Cruz. I said, I used to say, oh yeah, these governors, they've got it going on, and they do. But wow, they're stuck in Columbus and Baton Rouge and Trenton and Madison and Indianapolis. They're like stuck doing real things for real people, like all day long. They can't go. I said, you guys here in the Harry Reid Senate, you basically have a no-show job in Harry Reid Senate. Like you're free to move about the country. They can play hooky every day. And here's Rand Paul giving a speech at Berkeley, and here's Ted Cruz campaigning for this one, and so they've got something going on just logistically where they're able to. Now they're a majority in the Senate, so it'll be different. But I say let it all hang out. I'm all for free market competition. We are a free market, pro-competition movement that has no free market competition principles in its nominating process, none whatsoever. And that's the big mistake we make as conservatives. The other criterion, so full spectrum conservative, unafraid of the Clintons, you must carry your home state in 2 contiguous states. You also, I think you're also somebody who has to run as a populist. And I noticed that Elizabeth Warren is now described as a populist. It's very funny to me. Tea Party is like the biggest populist movement I've ever seen in my life. But they're not described as populism, are they? Racist, anti-American, anti-Democrat, anti-Obama, but never populist. She's described as a populist now. But she's onto something. That relatability and that accessibility and that populism. The biggest boon in 2014 for Republicans, I wish I could tell you, were women. We did fine among them, but the biggest boon were white working class voters. President Obama has basically completely decimated himself and his party among white working class voters. I'm just going to look at the statistic here. White working class voters. They used to be called Reagan Democrats, blue collar voters, but when you add race in there, given the fact that we have an African American president who gets 95 to 96% of African American voters to support him and his party, white working class voters in these Rust Belt states in the South for whom the jobs in manufacturing and construction are not coming back, they voted Republican overwhelmingly. And they're incredibly important to 2016. And you'll say, well, how are they going to vote Democratic? They may not vote. Ladies and gentlemen, you have to take into account all the conscientious objectors, the folks who actually may not vote. And that is important going into 2016. I also think it's smart for some of these guys and gals to wait to announce. Don't be in a rush on their behalf. Tim Pawlenty announced too early. Rick Perry got in too late. And I think, the Goldilocks test is pretty good. Plus, if you're a really serious candidate and you've got some donors who like you, they could just put up a super PAC to support you. So money won't be the problem. You don't have to get in early to sort of have a monopoly on the donor class. I think they should wait. And I think some people can't wait, but others can wait because you can understand somebody's positions overnight. And if you're a true conservative, you can actually wait longer because you don't need 3 months to explain why you're in a debate against Ted Kennedy saying you will absolutely protect a woman's right to choose and fund Planned Parenthood. You don't need a year to explain away your version of Obamacare. You don't need 18 months away to explain away your personal scandalabra. You can actually wait to announce. And I think some folks should wait. The reason that many of the mainstream media are pushing Jeb Bush, and I love the Bush family, really, I respect them tremendously. Who can't respect George, 90-year-old, and Barbara Bush and their service to this nation. But the reason that the mainstream media are pushing Jeb Bush is that they know they want everybody 4 months from now to be asking the question, do you want the third Bush or the first woman? And that's not a fair fight. Right now they act like it's Bush versus Clinton dynasty. They're writing their stories about dynastic politics. But it's really about third Bush, first woman, which will not be a fair fight. They're also pushing Governor Christie because he's nice to them and he has fun with them, or they used to have fun together. And I live in New Jersey. We raise our children in New Jersey public schools. We pay taxes in New Jersey. I very much like Governor Christie as my governor. But I think if what once made him glib now makes him guarded, with what once made him cavalier makes him cautious, people will look at his record much faster. And they'll look to see a conservative free market record in New Jersey. And we'll see what they find. Going through the list, nobody animates the grassroots like Ted Cruz. There's just no question. Nobody. I'm a speaker sometimes. I'm like the warm-up speaker when they all go and speak in places. And simply nobody can sort of light a fire under the grassroots quite like Senator Cruz. Senator Paul is I think his greatest gift to the conservative movement is bringing in young people who feel that being a libertarian has a comfortable place in the conservative movement, not in the Democratic Party. That he's exposing the fact that libertarian doesn't mean that you're smoking a joint while getting an abortion and marrying your same-sex sibling. It means Rand Paul's brand of libertarianism, which is government encroachment, NSA, and spying. Let's rein in the evil acronyms of the ACA, the NSA, and the IRS. These Rust Belt governors I mentioned, Governor Kasich, it's tough to argue with winning in Ohio by 20 points when the last couple of Republican nominees in Ohio did not win. But he, too, his record will be looked at. Anybody who's expanding Medicaid in their states will probably have a problem with the grassroots and will have a definite problem with in some of the debates. Mike Pence, who, in full disclosure, is a client of mine, doing great things in Indiana as the governor of Indiana, first one to take his state out of the Common Core, has largest tax cut in Indiana history, less than 100 days on the job, has expanded charter schools, and has this really clever thing that I want us all to take to other states that I think is the future of free market education reform for Republicans. Governor Pence has this clever thing where he says Plan A and Plan A. He said when he graduated from a Hoosier high school many years ago, Plan A was you go to college like he did in law school, like he did, and Plan B was you went and got a trade, skill certificate, and you went and took a job. You used your hands to support yourself and your family. He calls it Plan A and Plan A because he says not everybody is college material. So in Indiana, if you graduate from a Hoosier high school with a skill certificate, if you're a tradesman, if you're a carpenter, if you're a mechanic, if you're a welder, there is a Hoosier job waiting for you. That's pretty incredible. And it saves a lot of folks a great deal of student debt and angst and uncertainty. And I think that's really a nice model for us to take in other places as well. Governor Walker, complete hero, I hope, to everybody in this room, and what he's done 3 times in 4 years in a very purple state. So again, these are 3 people who can carry their home states and some contiguous states. But these guys in the Senate, I think, can also animate people who otherwise would stay home if you nominate somebody. And just finally, I'll say this because I've been a little tough on Mitt Romney today, but I want to say two last things to you. I think the 2014 elections also laid bare what a terrible campaign he ran. Nobody's talked about this. If we beat Obama's agenda in 2010 and 2014, and we didn't in 2012, the only difference really was the presidential race. And I think it's for all this hemming and hawing, let's get Governor Romney to run again. And again, I thank him for his public service. I think they're wonderful Americans, beautiful family. Why would we do that when the only time we couldn't defeat Obama's agenda was the time that we had him at the top of the ticket? Leave you with this last thought. I would never tell us to act like the Democrats, but I want us to learn one thing today from the Democrats. If they subscribe to the fiction of electability and who can win, not who can lead, they never would have nominated Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama. If Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama had been Republicans, they would have been told, you can't win. You're a peanut farmer from Georgia. You already pushed your luck as governor. Stay where you are. You can't win, Bill Clinton. You have this woman's problem, and you're governor of the second poorest state in the country. What in the world are you going to export economically for the rest of us? Barack Obama wasn't just told you can't win. He was told what we're all supposed to believe 8 years later, which is she's got it all wrapped up. He was told, wait your turn. Carter, Clinton, Obama all have three very important things in common that Republicans and especially conservatives should take a lesson from. One is they were all told you can't win. Number two is they all ignored the naysayers and critics and doubters, and they all won. We have 20 years of Democratic presidencies from those three guys not believing you can't win. Two-termers in there. And number three, they all won defying the elements of their party, having their so-called sister soldier moment, but they all won with people you never heard of. And I say this as somebody who God has blessed me. I've made a fortune as a Republican consultant, so there's not a scintilla of sour grapes here. But they all won with people you've never heard of. You got to purge what I call the staph infection from the Republican Party. It won't matter. It won't matter who you elevate as the nominee. It won't matter who you put as the nominee if you still have the same people running the show. And in the Democratic Party, they're true believers. They work like dogs for months, for years on end. You never see them look up. I asked the House Republicans right after Obama won in 2013. I was at their retreat in Williamsburg, and there they were. They're happy. They were in the majority. But it's the House Republicans, their spouses, and then senior staffers. So there's probably 500 some people in the room. And I said, as I was setting up my slides, I said, oh, I'll donate $1,000 to each of your favorite charities if you can name for me President Obama's two pollsters. And I should have really checked with my husband George first, but I knew I had made a safe bet. I knew I was going to walk out of there with all my money, maybe donate a couple $1,000. And I walked out of there with every penny. They all sort of looked around. These are members of the House of Representatives. And they said, and I said, exactly. You don't know his two pollsters' names. You know why? They don't want you to know who they are. They believed in him. They're not, the Romney people are like, oh, I just rode on the plane with Mitt. Terrific, because now he's a private citizen like you. That's great. Why weren't you working? So they don't want you to know who they are because they believe in the cause. They believe in doing the hard work, the drudgery. They are not about self. I think that the Republican consultancy is becoming way too much like the Democratic Party, which is it's all about me, myself, and I. Focus on me. Give me the money. Put me on the TV. Again, I say this with great credibility because I've done very well for myself. Thank you, God. And I've been on TV a gazillion times. So it's not about, oh, why can't I? So please take this authoritatively. Plus, maybe I'm even cutting against my own interest by saying get some fresh blood in there. Who knows? Maybe I'm one of the veterans now. But it's a serious point because you know what happens when Dole lost and McCain lost and Romney lost? They always blame the candidate. I even saw their quotes this time. How could you underestimate Ed Gillespie in Virginia? His pollster was asked. Same pollster was asked, how could you underestimate this? How could you we didn't see the last minute tide. Well, why not? It's your job, number one. But number two, they say, Bob Dole, he just seemed too old. John McCain, the electorate thought he was nuts. Mitt Romney, way too stiff. Well, then give the money back. It's like, guys, the other thing all three of them had in common is you. And we don't want you in the fourth time. So purge the staph infection. And the way you do that, let me tie it all together here in Morton and Leadership Institute. The way you do that is you recruit and you train and you start elevating. Start sharing the wealth of talent that the Leadership Institute has trained and has equipped. I want to see the next generation of young men and women and older men and women, who want to work on these campaigns because they believe in the principles, they believe in the Constitution, they love America, and they believe in that candidate. I want to see them rise to the fore. That's the way you win elections. Purge the staph infection, get the Leadership Institute trainees in there, and we'll be the dominant party, White House included. Thank you. And God bless you.